Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, as I said last week when I was doing the episode of the show on Glen Cadham, we'll be looking at the other distillery that is owned by Angus Dundee Distillers, that being Tomintoul. So, firstly, a big thank you to Angus Dundee and the Tomintoul Distillery for some of the samples for today's tasting. So, yeah, thank you very much for those. Now, you'll have to forgive me if I have done an episode of the show on Tomintoul before, but I don't think I have. I mean, I've done 170 odd of these shows, so I kind of forget what I've done half the time, you know. So if I have done an episode of the show and you've heard all the waffle before, you can just fast forward to the tasting bit, can't you, anyway. So, Tomintoul itself is a relatively new distillery in actual fact. I mean, well, I use the term relatively because it was, or should we say, the distillery was founded in 1964. Now, I mean, ever since, I guess, you know, what, 2000, 2001, that kind of time. I mean, distillery building just seems to have exploded, given the popularity of malt whisky now. But back in the 60s, you know, there wasn't quite such a craze, but there was distilleries were being built. So the distillery was founded by Hay and MacLeod and Company and W.S. and Strong and Company. Great names. Good old Scottish names then, MacLeod. So yeah, that was, the distillery didn't actually come online until 1965, which is a very apt date because we will get onto that when we get to discovering what little gems we'll be tasting this afternoon. Then the distillery was purchased in 1973 by the Fraser family, who also at the same time bought White & Mackay, and obviously, you know, Tomintoul became part of the White & Mackay portfolio. Now, White & Mackay seems to be one of those companies that kind of got shuffled around an awful lot. I mean, you know, several companies bought it. Probably the most well-known company to purchase it was in 1978 was Longrow. And for those of you with long memories, Longrow was quite a diverse conglomerate back in the 80s with, you know, fingers in many pies, shall we say. But anyway, so I mean, I got to know Tomintoul, well, just as it was changing hands. It changed hands in 2000, just as I was obviously coming into the whisky industry, which is when Angus Dundee purchased the distillery. And originally the distillery was built with 2 stills. I think it was increased to 4 in 1974, and kind of Tomintoul goes a little bit against the grain in my kind of popularist kind of thinking of, you know, pretty distillery, pretty whiskey, because let's face it, Tomintoul is not exactly a pretty distillery. It's not quite a tin cowshed, but it's a relatively agricultural looking set of buildings, shall we say. And I suppose even back in the 60s there was not really necessarily an eye to distillery visits and all this kind of thing. You know, distilleries were seen as essentially factories for producing malt whisky, principally for producing malt whisky for the blends. So you look at a number of the Scottish distilleries, and you know the buildings are just, at the end of the day, pretty functional buildings. You know, I mean, there are obviously a number of distilleries that do look quite pretty. They're built out of local stone, they have the pagoda roof and all that kind of stuff, and I suppose to a certain extent, you know, Dufftown kind of goes against the grain, because you could say Dufftown is quite a nice pretty looking distillery, but the whisky they produce is somewhat of the agricultural style, shall we say. But anyway, so there you have it. I mean, it's like I said, I mean, at the end of the day, whisky is an industry. I don't think it was, I mean, nowadays people are building distilleries, and, you know, practically their first thoughts after sort of, you know, designing where the stills and the washbacks and all the other paraphernalia is going to go, a visitor centre is pretty much a must, you know, and there's still quite a number of distilleries that obviously don't tend to have a visitor centre, and although I believe Tomintoul does, I think it's only sort of by appointment visits, shall we say. But I mean, it's a revenue stream, isn't it? At the end of the day, people love to go and see distilleries, buy things from the distillery that they can only purchase there. So anyway, So there you have it. So currently owned by Angus Dundee Distillers, who are a pretty big company in actual fact with regards to their output. They've recently, well, relatively recently, bought Coatbridge bottling plant, and they've got warehousing. They're one of the largest producers of exported whiskey, and yeah. And so it's a big company, although it doesn't feel like a big company. It's strange, isn't it? How sometimes when you sort of think about sort of companies, and it's probably partly to do with the sort of like the people that run it, the sales reps and things like that. It has a feeling of a small independent kind of company, but when you sort of scratch the surface, you realise that they are pretty damn big. Talking of independence, you probably know, or you may not know, that yet another independent distillery company has fallen into the hands of the big boys. Yes, I read somewhere the announcement that Brown-Forman had decided to purchase the Ben Riach distillery company. Of course, Ben Riach owns not only Ben Riach but Glendronach and Glenglassaugh, as you say, struggling to remember. I think this is going to be the way of things. Acquisitions are going to carry on. I don't think this will be the last acquisition we hear of this year. I'm sure there'll probably be one or two more. And it's always sad to sort of see an independent company, go that way. But when you think about how big a company Brown-Forman is, they've certainly got the money to sort of invest, shall we say. So, like I said, I don't think this will be the end of the acquisitions, shall we say, in this year or in years going forward. But anyway, that's enough for kind of waffling bit. Let's get on to what we'll be tasting this afternoon. Right, okay, so I thought it's going to be really nice, like last week, to get under the skin of the distillery. So we've got a range of age statements, different bottlings, and hopefully this should be quite entertaining, I think. We're going to kick off with the 10-year-old. This is bottled at 40%, and it's quite inexpensive, relatively inexpensive. The second bottle we look at is a brand new release. This is the 15-year-old Portwood finish, bottled at 46%. Now, I'm guessing from the colour, it's probably spent 2, maybe 3 years in Portwood. I don't know for exactly how long. It replaces the old 12-year-old that was part of the portfolio, and I wasn't really that keen on it. It was just a bit too heavy on the port. It was too much of the sort of syrupy red fruits and just not enough balancing distillery character. So it will be interesting to see if the vatting has been tweaked, if anything, and we have a bit more balance in that particular one. So the next bottling we'll be looking at is the good old 16-year-old, bottled at 40%. Pretty much one of my go-to Speyside whiskies. Still just a really, really good price. I mean, it's gone up a bit over the last few years, it has to be said, like every whisky has done, but I still think sort of value for money wise, you really can't go wrong with a 16-year-old, so we'll see how that one fares. Next bottle we'll be looking at is the 25-year-old. This again is bottled at 40%, and I think, if memory serves me right, was actually only released in the miniatures, which came in the little miniature tri-pack to start off with, and then was bottled in a standard 70cl bottle. I think, don't quote me on that, but I have a feeling that is it. Next bottling we'll be looking at is a very special bottling, and this was a sample from the Whiskey magazine when I tasted it for one of the issues. This is the 5 decades. Now, this was bottled basically to celebrate 5 decades of the distillery being in existence, and the 50th anniversary, obviously, of the distillery as well. So Robert Fleming, the master distiller, selected casks from 1965, 1975, 85, 95 and 2005. Vatted them together, about 3,000 bottles, I think, something like that, 2,000 to 3,000. So, pretty limited, fairly steep price tag at somewhere in the region of 200 and something, I think, if memory serves me correct. And so interesting to see what that's like. And finally, we'll be looking at the Peaty Tang. Now, it's a no age statement. It's young spirit, and I did kind of. Where do I put it in the range? I mean, you know, do I put it at the beginning? Do I put it after the 10-year-old? I mean, when I tend to taste whiskies, obviously I will tend to sort of leave the peated ones till last, because obviously you don't want to ruin your palate. Well, not ruin your palate, that's the wrong word, but you know, taint the palate if you're going to taste sort of other whiskies, and it's always difficult to sort of taste, you know, non-peated whiskies after tasting something relatively peaty. Now the peaty Tang is quite heavily peated, I believe about 55 parts per million, although from memory it doesn't tend to come across quite as heavily peated as that, but we shall see when we get to the end. So so I think hopefully you'll agree, quite an interesting selection of bottlings to share with you. So let's get started then. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the good old 10-year-old then. Let's see what the nose gives us. Pleasantly barleyed. I mean, there is a kind of, to a certain extent, sort of ish similarity with Glencadam, although it's not got the sort of tropical fruit that Glencadam actually has. But it's a lovely sort of elegant, quite full bodied Speyside whisky. Like I said, barley led, some nice fleshy fruit, a little bit of spice. I mean, I have liked the 10-year-old. I mean, I didn't choose to stock it because basically I just think that the 16 is just such a brilliant value for money. I think I'd rather sell the 16, although, you know, maybe I should have the 10-year-old, I don't know. But the trouble is with, as you know, the shop has got very limited shelf space, so one has to be a bit choosy sometimes. And sometimes whiskies that you think are really, really nice, you know, they're in the room, shoehorn the things in. So, but anyway, there's a little bit of citrus going on there, a little bit of green citrusy sort of fruit, a little bit of almost kind of gooseberry, and just a little bit of oak. Not a huge amount, just a little bit there, kind of like sat nicely in the background. So yeah, nicely balanced nose, I think. Palate. Quite chewy, malty, a little bit of herbalness, very toffee, a lot of oak right up in the front, right on the opening of the palate. There's a little bit of citrus comes through, so it does freshen towards the finish. It's a medium length whisky. It's pleasant, it's full, it's not particularly complex, but you know, it delivers nicely. I think it's got, like I said, got some nice weight to it, some fruit, some barley. Once you kind of get past all the oak, it's all quite pleasantly fresh and, you know, enjoyable. It's just a nice whisky, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 15-year-old port finish. Like I said, this is we'll just see what the nose gives us, shall we? Well, first off, the port is quite obvious. It's got sweet red fruit, slight syrupy note, but it's not all about the port finish. There is some lovely barley. There's a bit of apricot, a little bit of vanilla underneath that, but yeah, the focal point is on the wine notes, but it's certainly not kind of overdoing it, shall we say. Slightly herbal now, a little bit of almost kind of camphory like herbs, but not quite as kind of intense as that. Sort of quite subtle. And again, it's a nice nose. It's elegant. It's got some weight to it, but like I said, it's got some class to it, and a little bit of getting a little bit of wood spice now. Yeah. Palate. A little bit dry on the finish, but again, it's got some lovely sort of weight, some fruit. Possibly the port is a little bit more, not unbalancing, wrong word, a little bit more noticeable, I suppose is probably the right word. Again, it sort of kicks off with that sort of slightly syrupy coated red fruits, a bit of spice, there's a little bit of red licorice, a lot of malt in actual fact. It's got a real dark core to it, which is quite a surprise, I think, for Tomintoul. It's got a nice sort of, yeah, real maltiness in the middle there, and that does kind of linger, and sort of, it does, you know, meld in quite nicely with the red fruits. Nice spicy finish, but I'm certainly getting a little bit of barley, a little bit of vanilla. Yeah, I think that is really nicely balanced. I think they've got the balance, not, I would say, 100% spot on, because it's always, I guess, really difficult when it comes to sort of finishing whiskies. But you know, that's a pretty damn good whiskey, I think. So yeah. Nice. Moving on to the 16-year-old. Like I said, I've always really liked the 16-year-old. It's just, it's probably far too cheap for what it actually is, to be honest with you. But well, I'm not going to argue with that, you know. So anyway, let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? Starting to show a little bit of maturity. The barley and the oak is starting to move in that kind of slightly dusty way towards maturity. But again, it's got some lovely citrus. It's got some vibrancy. I mean, I have tasted the odd bottle that is not quite up to the standard, it has to be said, but when it's on song, this is absolutely gorgeous. Really weighty, quite full, but again, lovely elegance. And again, barley led, loads and loads of barley character. Sort of almost kind of like touch of cereal husks possibly, and some lovely deep fruit. Touch of green citrus coming through now. Again, that sort of slight gooseberryness. And again, and the oak is all really quite harmonious, nicely behaved, sort of structuring, but not sort of giving, you know, too much sort of toasty vanilla kind of notes. Just a subtle sort of oak kind of character on the nose. So, palate. So juicy, moist and elegant and long, touch of barley, a little bit more oak, a little bit more of that slightly sort of milky kind of oak character to sort of kick off with. There's a little bit of bittering spice coming through on the finish, but it's just kind of adding sort of like, you know, another layer of complexity to the whiskey. It's soft, it's easy going, it's fairly robust and really, really juicy. I mean, it's just such a lovely whiskey, and like I said, it's if you've never had Tomintoul before, then certainly 16-year-old is still just amazingly good value for money, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the 25-year-old. Let's see what a few more years on the clock does for the spirit then. Oh, that is a lovely nose. Now we're getting more dusty, we're getting more American oak, we're getting more maturity. There's a slight spiciness, there's a possibility that there might be some sherry at work here, possibly. It's got a little bit of that sort of spicy sherry, a little bit of herbalness. But oh, that is an absolutely beautiful nose. But again, just 25, and it has got a lovely vibrancy, a lovely freshness, touch of sort of minerality, sort of, you know, citrus minerality kind of axis going on. Robust again, fruity, touch of banana, apricot, and again some just absolutely gorgeous barley. Really clean. It is just such a classic whiskey, I think, is how you would describe this. It doesn't feel like 25, as we say, it feels younger. It's got, again, it's a bit like Glencadam, it just seems to sort of just age amazingly well, you know. Absolutely gorgeous. Getting more of the gooseberry kind of green gage kind of character coming through now, a little bit more herbalness. Palate? Oh, that's beautiful. Lovely gliding finish, a little bit of honey, white fruits. Full, again, like I said, full bodied, barleyed, apricots, a little bit more oak character, but again the oak is really subtle, starting to show a little bit of that sort of dusty maturity, certainly right on the finish. Absolutely fantastic, and again a nice kind of mineral, sort of green citrus kind of finish, which just gives it a bit of freshness, which is, you know, quite surprising considering it's only bottled at 40%. It feels like it's 46%. It has that sort of, you know, lift to it that you know, often 46% and above kind of, you know, that extra alcohol kind of gives it now. But it's kind of getting that from the sort of like the minerality and the citrus notes, and oh, that is lovely, absolutely gorgeous. So, moving on to the 5 decades. So, let's see what the nose is on this end, shall we? Now that has got some lovely maturity to it. Again, I'm getting some, possibly a little bit more sherry. Some nice sort of subtle, spicy, dried fruits, but again, almost perfumed barley. Dusty oak, vanilla, touch of dark chocolate, milk chocolate as well. But all the while, just still contains that lovely vibrancy, that lovely barleyed character. I'm getting some sweet American oak notes now, along with the dusty oak notes. I mean, this is just an incredibly complex layer upon layer of character. You just stick your nose in and you just sort of, something new comes up. Again, it's got that sort of almost trademark sort of gooseberry green gage kind of note coming through. I mean, given a bit of just this while it's been sat in the glass, the sort of sherry notes just kind of drop off and the American oak notes kind of come up. Give it a bit of aeration and the sherry comes back again. Absolutely stunning, softly spiced, elegant, and the packaging as well. I mean, I have to say the packaging is absolutely gorgeous. Lovely box, you know, nice decantery kind of like bottle. Obviously that sort of thing is a little bit peripheral if your spirit is rubbish, but I suppose we've become quite accustomed now to sort of seeing, you know, old and not always necessarily old, but sort of prestige bottlings come in fancy decanters and stuff like that, but certainly not a case of style over substance. This is absolutely stunning. Palate? Dark, malty, treacly, but again that sherry component is all just really nicely harmonious. There's still some dusty American oak, some vanilla, real kind of vibrant finish to it. Well, I mean, it is bottled at 50% after all, so that the alcohol is certainly giving it that kind of wonderful fresh aftertaste, lovely sort of spicy tingling finish to the whiskey. Don't need water with that at all whatsoever. Again, it's lovely, robust and full, lots of barley character still, you know. So even though it's pretty old. There's a bit of sherry cask in there as well. The distillery character is still really evident, and there's still just a slight intimation of that kind of, like I said, that green gage gooseberry kind of note right on the finish. So, oh my god, that is incredible. That is very, very nice. Oh, well, now we're on to the Peaty Tang. Now I know, this is a lovely whisky in its own right. I mean, it's one that I've stocked for absolutely ages. But obviously we're not expecting the fireworks, shall we say, of the 5 decades. But anyway, let's see what the nose gives us. Actually, that's pretty heavily peated. It's been quite a while since I've tasted that, but that's got some phenolic content, it has to be said. Now, the interesting thing is it's a kind of drier peat. It's a bit like, it's kind of almost kind of classically sort of mainland kind of peat character. It's more sort of not reedy, but sort of, you know, you can almost smell the kind of decomposing heather and that kind of thing. There's a slight tariness, a little bit of creosote. But it's also got a lovely sweetness. Again, I'm getting some lovely barley sweetness, a touch of vanilla. For a peated malt, yes, the peat is the obvious kind of intent of it, should we say? But it's not the be all and end all. I mean, it's a little bit more than a tang. I remember when I first tasted it, it did just have a tang. You know, it was more like, I guess, the 10-year-old with a little bit more, you know, with a peaty character, but it does seem to be, shall we say, a little bit more peat orientated these days, but that's not a bad thing. A little bit of coffee, some malt. Even again, I can still get a little bit of that sort of green citrus kind of coming through, right on the edges. I mean, you kind of have to sort of ignore the peatiness to kind of get that part of the spirit, but even so, I mean, that's still pretty impressive that kind of level of peating, and still with some lovely distillery character. Palate. Again, quite chewy, certainly on the finish. Not as intensely peated, more dusty, dry peat, certainly on the finish. Again, sort of kicks off with the barley, a little bit more oak, but not a huge amount. Again, really fresh, citric. Peat really lingers, and it really kind of like sticks to the sort of like the edges of your tongue with that sort of dry, almost sort of dusty, almost sooty kind of character to it. A little bit of tar as well, a little bit of yeah, sort of creosote-y, tarry kind of notes, and a sweetness as well. I mean, certainly getting a kind of a not a confected sweet note, but a slightly sort of not quite boiled sweet notes, but kind of getting in that kind of direction. Yeah, really nice. And again, I think sort of really well priced, and you know, like I said, you know, if you love your peaty Islers and things like that, it's always worth looking at a Speyside or a Highland malt that's been peated, because they just give you a different character of peat. So, and certainly this one does. So, yeah, nice one to finish on, I think. Right, okay, so let's sum this afternoon's little tasting up then. Well, Tomintoul, lovely distillery. Yeah, might not be the prettiest distillery on the face of the planet, but certainly the whisky is quite pretty, shall we say. And again, like Glencadam, it does seem to sort of retain its personality and its distillery character, even through the use of sherry and port and things like that. And peat, and it kind of like is, like I said, you sort of start off with a 10-year-old. You see it as a fairly straightforward barley-led, nice, pleasant, robust, fruity whiskey, and it retains that throughout the entirety of the range. Yes, it gets a little bit older, a little bit more mature, but it always seems to retain that kind of core character, which is just what I love. You know, I love to see that kind of thing. I don't want to see suddenly, you know, a bottling that's swamped by sherry or port or whatever. I want to see a balance, and I keep going on and on and on about it. But that is what appeals to me. You know, I want to taste all the facets of a whiskey, and certainly I think sort of Tomintoul kind of ticks all those kind of boxes. And certainly, when you think that your average 16-year-old whiskey is probably sort of pushing 50-60 pounds these days, the fact that the Tomintoul 16, I can still retail it in the shop for what, about 44.95 is 45 quid. You know, it's like, what a bargain, an absolute bargain. You know, please don't put the price up. You know, just because I say it's an absolute bargain, please don't put the price up. Because and you should buy this, because this is great whiskey, really nice whiskey, as are all the bottlings that we've tasted today. So yeah, hats off to Angus Dundee. I think they have two really good distilleries in their portfolio, and like I said, lovely company to deal with, and it has the feeling of a small company. You know, there's just the way they seem to go about business, which is really nice. You can kind of contact them, ask for samples, all that kind of stuff, and you know, they're really forthcoming, and they just feel like a small independent company. But like I said, when you think about it, they are absolutely immense. They're huge, and so lovely, great stuff. Anyway, so that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I haven't got a clue what I'm going to be doing next week. We'll figure that out at some stage during the week, but you'll obviously be the first to know when you get the video. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the rest of today's incredibly sunny weather, and maybe I should have done the episode of the show in the garden, but anyway, that's enough of that for today. So all that's left to saying is good afternoon and good ramming.